Morning people wake up for peace and quiet. McDonald's breakfast people, we wake up for the sweet rush of getting that warm, delicious breakfast right before it ends.
Crush your morning goals with a steak, egg, and cheese bagel or any breakfast sandwich and snag another one for just $1 with the buy one, get one deal. Only in the McDonald's app. Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid once per day. Must opt into rewards.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
The wind is gone out from my sails, and no one's left to tell my tale.
Welcome to the Deconstructionist Podcast. I'm your host, John Williamson, and this is a bonus episode. So, still hard at work. My voice is a little hoarse right now, and you might be able to tell. I've been doing a ton of recording, probably more. I've booked more interviews in the last 2 months than I think I've done even in previous years. And so there is a method to my madness, and I will talk about that when I release the season teaser trailer here in a couple weeks. So more to come on that. But in the meanwhile, to tide you over, I reached out to an old friend. And so if you've listened to the podcast for a long time, you will recognize this voice as Mr. Adam Narlock. And so Adam and I started the podcast together 7 years ago. I miss him greatly, but he and I talk all the time, and he misses you, sends his love. But I was going back through our archives, and I realized that in the early days, very, very early days, we're talking the first month we were in existence, we didn't know what we were going to be quite yet. And so if you go back and listen to the early episodes, audio quality, not great. Adam and I didn't know what we were doing. But we were so you kind of see the growth and the maturation over time, but we also weren't sure exactly what type of podcast we're going to be at that point. Initially, we thought we were just going to record episodes between the two of us, do heavy amounts of research, and release maybe one a month or so. And so to provide some additional content, we thought it'd be fun to do recommended readings. And so we recorded a recommended readings podcast, and I think we even labeled it part 1 or number 1 with the intentions on doing more. And 7 years later, we're finally delivering on that promise, guys. We're coming through finally. So here is your part 2, and we hope to do more of these in the future. Adam is a voracious reader, and thank God for awesome improvements in technology. I texted him earlier today and I said, hey, what are you doing? Do you got 15 minutes you can jump online? And he said, sure. And Adam's always reading something interesting. And what I've always loved about Adam is he and I have very different interests, but we meet in that common ground in the middle. And so I'm always fascinated to hear what he's reading. And he's always just very well-rounded. So even if it's not directly related to spirituality per se, as he even says on this episode, you can find the divine in weird places. So hopefully you enjoy this. I'm going to try my best to go back and write down every single book we talked about so I can put it in the show notes. But here you go. This is our second one, and hopefully you enjoy this. And here are the books that he and I have read that we highly recommend. So here you go. And like I said, a couple weeks, look out for the teaser. Well, I guess it's a teaser. The season preview for this next season. I hope to have the season launch in March. So right now it's shaping up pretty well. Like I said, tons of interviews and feeling pretty good about being able to launch in March, but I want to make sure that I have enough content to go consecutive weeks. So more to come on that, but excited to share all that content with you. Lots of fun series that I've got put together. So you'll be hearing from me soon. And otherwise, enjoy this and enjoy Adam's sultry voice. All right.
Do you believe in love? 'Cause I'm alone. Do you believe in hell? 'Cause I am helpless. This water I am treading is now.
Don't you love that countdown?
I know that's super cool, man.
Welcome, Adam. I just texted Adam and I said, "Hey, Adam, what are you doing? Do you have 15 minutes? We owe our OG listeners from 7 years ago a part 2 recommended reading, because there's a part 1 and then there was nothing after that. So I was like, you know what, let's do a recommended reading. It's been a while.
And I'm like, yeah, I'm just sitting on the couch reading. So that's perfect.
Yeah. You can recommend the book you're reading. But
I will.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, this is crazy. The technology, I was just remarking on this the other day. I was talking to somebody, I'm like, when we first started, the only technology that existed was Skype. And if you go back and listen to our original episodes, the audio quality, not great.
Not stellar.
No.
Nothing to be super proud of.
No. So yeah, so like you're a voracious reader, as am I. So let's talk about what are you reading right now?
Man, so I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I'm reading right now, but you're right. Since we promised this 7 years ago, I'm probably also going to give some highlights of some of my favorites from the last, like, maybe 5 years.
Perfect.
So we'll kind of go all over the place. Currently, right now, I'm reading a book that I'm embarrassed that I haven't read by now, because I literally bought it, and the only reason I know this is because I inscribed it in the middle of in the front cover of the book, is Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time.
Oh wow! Okay,
I've always wanted to read it. I read most of Brian Greene's Elegant Universe.
Yep.
And I just, I'm not really a math guy, and it's a stretch for my brain to really follow this stuff, but this is such a well-written book for lay people. And it is just one of those things that I think through our podcast, one of the things that a common theme that came up over and over again from me was just how foolish it is to relegate certain things as spiritual topics, ideas, or content, and other things as like secular or worldly or whatever, when anything that does a good job accessing or processing what it means to be alive and to interact with the real world is, to me, a very spiritual thing. Whether it's physics or theology or philosophy, or a really good novel that accesses like the heart of what it means to wrestle with existence as a human being in a complex world with complex relationships and complex realities. That has just been a great journey for me into things like this. So yeah, right now, Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. I'm on chapter 3. I just started it like 2 days ago, so I'm actually making pretty good time. And it's awesome.
That's so fun, man. I remember for people who have been listening for a long time, they probably are aware of the fact that you and I have always felt like science and spirituality, go together. And, we had Dr. Mckeown on, which was one of my favorite episodes we ever did.
Yes.
But yeah, that stuff's fascinating. I think it helps kind of expose, I think, a little bit of creation. I mean, because there's so much mystery out there, so many things we don't know yet, like what is, dark matter, and all these like things that we've just now started to study that we don't understand yet. So I think that's interesting. Have you seen?
Yeah, no, it's amazing.
Have you seen the Netflix documentary it's partly about Stephen Hawking's work, but it's about black holes? Or no, I'm sorry, infinity.
No.
I can't remember now. Now I'm confusing the two. I watched the two documentaries back to back, but there's one on infinity.
Ooh.
That's fascinating, and it gives like a visual kind of display of one of the theories. And then there's one on black holes, because we really don't know a lot about black holes either. And one of those two, Stephen Hawking's, I want to say his students were working on some of the calculations surrounding it. It was absolutely fascinating.
Oh man, that's awesome. I'll definitely have to check that out.
Yeah, maybe some scotch first though. It's like you're like, always. Well, okay, we're tiny.
Always.
I love that, man.
That helps with everything. What about you? What are you digging into right now?
A couple of the books I pulled out for this. One of the books I read several years ago now that I thought, if you're interested in world religions, specifically Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, a lot of these different world religions. There's a book called God Is Not One by Stephen Prothero.
Yeah.
He's fantastic, and I'm actually going to have him on this season. Finally nailed him down, but it's just a really well-written book that's, I think, accessible in the sense that it kind of gives you a good high-level overview of the different religions. And for me, it was eye-opening in a lot of ways because there are a lot of things I thought I knew. But yeah, really, really fascinating book. So if you're interested in just kind of like a one book that kind of gives you a nice overview of those different religions.
Did that come out like about 10 years ago? Because I think I read a few chapters of that when it first came out, just like sitting at Barnes and Noble.
It was, let me see here, 2010.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Yeah, I remember when that hit the shelf, and I was like, oh, this looks interesting.
Yeah, he's got a new one coming out that looks really interesting that we're going to talk about in a couple weeks. So I'm interested to see what that's all about. So,
oh man, that's awesome.
Yeah. So since we haven't talked about books in 7 years, going back a little ways, like what are, because I know you and I talk. You typically will reach out and say, hey, this book blew my mind, and I know there have been multiple times where you've had some good ones.
Man, let me tell you something. I'd never read any Alan Watts before.
Oh, interesting.
I'd only maybe consumed a few of his kind of talks on YouTube, or some podcast recordings of some of his talks, and he's so charismatic and fun to listen to. He's got a great accent, and so I finally just grabbed one of his more accessible books. It's called The Wisdom of Insecurity. It's a little book, and the subtitle is A Message for an Age of Anxiety.
Wow. How appropriate.
And it's awesome. I think I remember texting you and I was reading it and being like, I honestly feel like I'm reading like a Richard Rohr or a Pete Rollins book.
Oh.
And it just had the same kind of tone, really almost universalizing a lot of the concepts that religion and philosophy are sort of grasping at, and boiling it down to like really accessible and not just accessible, but like a shared language that like anybody from any walk of life could be like, yeah, that's what I believe. And it was really, really good. So I think it was written in the 50s, and just excellent, just absolutely excellent book. I think the big takeaway that I had from it is the source of most of our anxiety is the need for reality to be something other than it is. So we have a pretty crummy relationship with reality, typically as human beings. Our ego needs things to be a certain way for our ego to be in shape. And when it feels threatened and we feel like things are out of control, we resort to all kinds of ways to lie to ourselves or think about how we can get things back to a place where we feel like our way of coping with reality, or mapping out how things are going to be, or relishing in the nostalgia of the past. And really, you're not really living if all you're ever trying to do is plan so that your future is how you want it to be, or live in a way of looking at the past, which is just also a mental construct. And so his suggestion is like what all of the, what Jesus and anybody else is like, this is all driven by your ego, which is your image of yourself. And just like Jesus said, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven unless you die to yourself. That's essentially what Buddhism is saying in another way. It's essentially what the Upanishads say in a lot of different ways. A lot of philosophy, Stoicism. This is just a really recurrent kind of, like what Richard Rohr would talk about, like a perennial wisdom of, you got to admit that you just have a really crummy relationship with reality. Yeah. And that you need reality to look a certain way so that your fragile little ego can remain intact. And really what you need to do is learn how to die.
Yeah.
You need to just forget all that. Just forget all that.
Man,
So
that's fascinating.
oh, it's so good. It was really, really good. And it's short, but it's dense. Yeah, it's really, really good, man. Loved it. Here's another one that's a blast from the past. But again, this is why I love to read. My son is in 6th grade now, and my son loves to read. Comes home from school a couple weeks ago, and he's like, "Dad, I am reading like the best book ever." And I'm like, "Oh, really? You're like, what is it?" And he goes, "It's The Outsiders."
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You know,
I didn't know that they started that one that young.
so my son's he's in advanced reading class or whatever, like the whatever the like leveled up kind of souped up reading group is. But they only let him read like an excerpt every day because they're trying to keep everybody like on the same page. And he's like, I want to finish it like now. So I had to run out to the bookstore and get him a used copy of The Outsiders. And he's just loving it. And I was like, man, I know I had to read it, but I either just cheated and didn't really read it, or my parents were really fundamentalist Christian at the time. I may not have been allowed to read it.
That's possible. It's
one of those two things, because I remember themes from it. I remember characters' names. I remember, the Socs versus the Greasers and Pony Boy, and
that's the name.
I remember,
and
I remember all that stuff, but I don't remember anything that happens in the book at all. So I sat down and read it, and just couldn't put it down. And I felt like it was some really similar concepts to a lot of what, the wisdom that I'm picking up in a lot of these, philosophical or theological works is of just the commonality of the struggle of life and learning how to be honest about that struggle and learning how to have empathy. And the kind of tagline from the book is when one of the characters is dying and they reference a Robert Frost poem about how all that's gold can't stay.
Yeah. Yep.
And the one character says to the other, like, "Stay golden, Pony Boy." Like, basically, like, continue to have a childlike faith. Continue to look at sunsets and find them beautiful. Continue to find like the simple pleasures of life and just, be honest with yourself and have that sort of that childlike faith. It's just universal stuff.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
Young adult lit, man. It's there are some classics out there that still hit hard. And I'm going through a similar thing with Fiona. Like she's so far ahead. We're having the problem now where she's at such an advanced level, but it's hard to find books for her to read that are still age appropriate.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like she can read at a really high level, but a lot of the characters and the subject matter is probably not appropriate for her age. So it's been really tricky trying to find. But yeah, she'll just absolutely devour books too. And we did such a good job of parenting, man. I got to tell you.
It's like one of my great joys is to see my kids love to read.
It's so fun.
Man, I
too.
didn't when I was a kid.
Really? That surprises me.
No, I didn't start to love to read until high school.
Wow. Interesting.
No.
Man. And I think it's so fun now, like you said, because she'll pick up books. Like we read The Hobbit together.
Oh.
And that was one of my favorite books growing up. And so like to reread that for the first time since I was in probably 4th grade was really cool. And, we're going through HP right now, Harry Potter.
Yep.
So we're on the Goblet of Fire. So it's been really fun to kind of read it.
Oh, that's when it gets good.
Yeah. Yeah. That's when
it gets good. The first 3 books are definitely like kids' books.
Yeah.
Goblet of Fire is when J.K. Rowling levels up.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting too. Like to your point though, like some of these other like classic books that we've read together, you start from an adult perspective, start to catch some things that you were just too young to understand at the time, Yeah,
absolutely.
Fantastic, man. I'm going to throw one out there, one that I just read, and we're getting ready to do a series on this one. It's with Megan Devine.
Mm-hmm.
who wrote the book, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, Meeting Grief and Loss in a Culture That Doesn't Understand. One of the best books I've ever read. Definitely, probably the best book I've ever read on the subject of grief. So this one I recommend for everybody, no matter if you are currently yourself grieving or have grieved, or if you're just somebody in the orbit of someone who's grieving and trying to figure out how best to support them. Because we do a horrible job at that. Like we don't really, it's an awkward thing, especially within Western culture. Cause like, one of the things we talk about in the interviews too, that coming up is talk about the fact that like, what do you say? Like when somebody comes up to you and they're like, "Hey, how you doing, man?"
Fine.
Yeah.
Great.
Your life could be falling apart, but you still say, "I'm great. Yeah, I'm good, man."
That's what people say. And I'm not, this is not like me. So when I did a values assessment a couple years ago for work, two of my highest values are authenticity and vulnerability.
I could see that.
I just have an allergy to faking it. And so typically if somebody's like when you and I, we hadn't talked in a little while, when you called me today and we started just kind of BSing for a little bit before we hit record. No, we were talking about all the stuff that we're stressed out about.
Yeah, exactly.
I just find that it connects you more to people. Mm-hmm. And I don't really want to look as much like I have it all together. I would much rather find a common ground to connect in reality with people. So I love to be like, if somebody's like, "Hey, how's it going?" I'm like, I'm making it, but it kind of sucks right now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the whole premise of this book too, is giving permission to people to be where they are. And a lot of the time it's like, you're in a place where things are not good, like things are falling apart. Like if you would have talked to me 3 months ago, I'm like, my life is literally falling apart around me. Like my dad's in the hospital getting ready to have surgery. My mom just passed away. My relationship came to an end. I just got COVID again. Like all this stuff is happening. And like, as Megan Devine says in her book, acknowledgement is everything.
It is.
She says, and sometimes you just need the straight truth. She even says in the book, "You're in pain. It can't be made better." Like
it's a relief to hear that.
Yeah. She's like, you don't need solutions. You don't need to move on from your grief. You need someone to see your grief, to acknowledge it. You need someone to hold your hands while you stand there in blinking horror, staring at the hole that was your life. Some things cannot be fixed. They can only be carried. And I'm like, okay.
It's legit, man.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. It's one of those themes that keeps popping up. It goes back to what you said about authenticity. Sometimes like you just need somebody to be real with you. And like, I think we go into problem solving mode, or at least I know I do. Like,
oh, absolutely.
Fix it. I'm like, I can't fix that for you. I can't bring that person back from the dead.
Nope.
And there's nothing I can say that's going to make you feel better, And so like I talked about like the best reaction that I got after my mom passed was, and it was predominantly people like our age or younger. So we seem to be learning at least a little bit, would say, "Hey man, I am so sorry. Is there anything that you need?" And that's it. No platitudes, no like trying to sympathize by way of like giving examples in their own life.
Oh man, that's
none of that.
That's one that drives me nuts when people do that.
Yeah. It's awful. And she talks about that in the book too. It's just like, and I would do it too. I'd find myself, oh yeah, I remember when this happened to me. It like minimizes their grief or their pain, and it puts a spotlight on me,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what's needed in the moment. You just have to say, I'm sorry.
I think it always comes from a good place of like a warped sense of empathy.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, I can relate. You're not alone. But it never lands that way.
No, it never comes across that way. But yeah, great book. Highly recommended for anybody. It's useful for, like I said, if you're currently grieving yourself, or even if you want to be a better support to those around you who are going through grief. It's just an absolutely wonderful tool. So
I love that.
It's my next one.
I love that. There's so many other ones that I could throw out there right now. Let me just kind of pick a few off the top of my head. So here's a good one. I think that we live in an age where, especially because of technology, and I think it's gotten even worse post-COVID, there is just this propensity to try to do a million things and overcommit. Mm-hmm. And I think our culture in general has a really warped sense of boundaries.
Yeah.
And focus. And a book that I've read now twice, but I reread it again just last year, is Essentialism. It's The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Mckeown.
Oh.
And nutshell is do less, but do it better. Seek clarification on what you're really after. Take time to really understand what it is you need to do. And then create boundaries so that you get to do the thing that you're supposed to do. And if it means you need to have a conversation with your partner, or if it means you need to have a conversation with your friends, or if it means you need to have a conversation with your boss, seeking clarity about what you actually need to be spending your time on and pursuing the essential aspect of what it is that you need to do is so unbelievably freeing and just detangles the knots of stress that we all get in when we try to multitask all the time. I was recently having a conversation with one of my colleagues, and I highlighted to her a conversation that I had recently with my boss about essentialism, even though I didn't say that. He had asked me to do what I realized was way too much within a period of time. And the job that I was hired to do, I was doing it very well. And some of the things that he was asking me to do were kind of outside the scope of what I was hired to do. And they were very, very time consuming. And they frankly weren't things I was even very good at. And so I just called him up and I said, hey man, we need to have a talk. I'm trying to do X and Y at the same time, and I'm really struggling. And what I realized after I took a step back was I don't think I can do both. In fact, I know I can't do both. So I think I should just do X because that's what I was hired to do. That's what's created the most impact from my role. And that also means that I can't do Y. And frankly, I'm not very good at Y. So if you want me to do Y, I can. You're the boss. But then I can't do X. And he was just like, oh, well, I didn't realize that. I'm really sorry. And yeah, you should totally just focus on X. And I ended up having like the best performance year like I've ever had. And I was recounting this story to my colleague, and she was like, I can't believe that you actually had that conversation with your boss. And I was like, why can't you believe that? She was like, I've just never felt like I could do that. And I'm like, you're not asking to not do your job. You're asking to be allowed to do your job.
Yeah.
So
or
just
direct your focus to where you're going to be more effective.
Yeah. Again, back to like what I was talking about with like Alan Watts, or the reason I'm reading Brief History of Time is like, I'm just really obsessed with this idea that, in order to live a life of wisdom and purpose, you need to have a good relationship with reality. And in order to have a good relationship with reality, you need to have an accurate assessment of what you can do, what you want to do, what you're capable of, where your desires are, where your gifts are, and how that actually aligns with reality. Not what your ego wants reality to be, but what it actually is. And learning how to have, the kind of conversations and creating plans and learning and listening in order to create as much contact between the real you and the reality that you find yourself in. It's wonderful. It's just, you want to talk about spirituality. I mean, that is like, it's fire, man.
Yeah. It preaches well to a society that is just absolute burnout culture. like we compare just the way that we operate from pretty much all perspectives to, like, say, Europe, and the amount of time that they give and provide their employees compared to us. Like, we just redline like nonstop. We are just a fast food culture, just driving ourselves into the ground. Like, you remember when we went to Europe?
I was just going to say, I know what you're going to say right now.
Yeah. Like I think I warned you guys. I was like, look, everything is just slower paced. It's not that, like, nobody's in a hurry, but, like, they appreciate wind down in a way that we don't even understand. And you will feel so good within, like, a day of being there. Once you accept it, the flow of things over there, and you just kind of roll with it and you acclimate to it, like, any stress that you were carrying with you will be gone.
Oh, I'm with you, man. Travel abroad, because Americans are insane.
We are. Yeah. I wonder, do Canadians operate that way? Our Canadian friends should let us know.
That I do not know.
Yeah.
I've not spent enough time in Canada to have any opinion on the subject.
I watch a lot of Letterkenny and Shoresy, but that's the extent of it. That's all I know. It's both wonderful shows. So thank you, Canada.
Oh, man. Fun times.
I got to say that the one book I don't think I've hyped enough on the podcast is, I don't know if you got a chance to read the most recent one from Jonathan Martin, our boy.
No. Did he write another one after How to Survive a Shipwreck?
Yeah. So he wrote, and honestly, this is my favorite book he's ever done. It's called The Road Away from God, How Love Finds Us Even as We Walk Away.
Oh, cool.
And it's based off of this idea that he had. And I think we discussed it the first time he was on, where he talked about, he was fascinated with this idea of, after the crucifixion and the disciples are on the road to Emmaus and they're walking away.
Oh, yeah.
From the crucifixion. And even on the road, as they're walking away, they find Jesus walking alongside them. So even as they, are walking away technically from God, God finds them where they're at.
Love that, man.
And it's this beautiful, it's literally the book that if I had written a book on everything that we've learned, if you want to call it deconstruction or a spiritual journey or evolution or whatever you want to call it, that would have been the book. He nailed it. I mean, I would recommend that to anybody who is struggling and is just figured out, that they're kind of on this path. I would recommend that book highly. Like, that would be a good book to start with. It's very easy read. He's a great writer. But yeah, it's brilliant.
I love that. I think that if I could kind of put my reading journey in a nutshell, I used to read to explicitly find out who God was. And in order to do that, you need to make sure you have the right content and the right books, because, oh my gosh, you could get led astray. And what if somebody's a false teacher or, whatever? And it was this very intentional search for concrete answers that reveal explicitly and intentionally to me who God is. So then I can know him, and then I can know that I'm right, and I can feel, again, I'm just satiating my ego that's afraid. And what I've realized is that God hides himself in all of reality. So if you pursue the joy of just learning about reality, you find God walking beside you saying, yep, there I am. Yep. There too. Yep. Yeah. There too. Yep. Oh yeah. And by the way, even when you learn about yourself, like that, it's the indirect approach.
Yeah.
Instead of the direct approach, which is that, I mean, that's been a lifelong lesson for me, man. It's like when you try to force something and you try really, really hard to get the knowledge of something, the wisdom usually eludes you. But when you kind of drop that and you relax and you pursue something indirectly, you end up learning a lot more. Like Viktor Frankl's famous quote, which is another one of the best books I've ever read, Man's Search for Meaning. that joy cannot be pursued; it can only ensue.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look for something else in order to get it. So, yeah, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, Marcus Aurelius, Alan Watts, Richard Rohr, John freaking Steinbeck.
There's one you haven't mentioned yet, and I'm shocked because you were obsessed with this book. You could not stop preaching it from the hilltops.
Which one?
Brothers Karamazov.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, you were
absolutely.
Like, this is the greatest book I've ever read.
I think I read that so long ago that I thought maybe I'd talked about it maybe on the podcast. So, oh yeah, Brothers Karamazov is absolutely wonderful. You want to talk about somebody that was hard baked in the crucible of suffering in Russia. I mean, Dostoyevsky was sentenced to death. He, worked in a work camp for years, and as he was about to be executed, literally the firing squad was lined up. He was about to be executed. They stayed his execution. I mean, this guy has suffered, and he understands what it means to be human and to wrestle with humanity and reality and to learn and to love and to grow. And the complexity of what it means to be humans wrestling with reality. The Brothers Karamazov is absolutely wonderful. Father Zosima is one of the best characters of all literature.
That's one it's on my list. I haven't read it yet, but it reminds me of another book that I like that's considered a classic. And they just, I'm sure they've made other versions of the movie, but they just put a movie version out on Netflix that I've been saving. It's also subtitled, so I have to be paying full attention to it. But I don't know, have you ever read All Quiet on the Western Front?
No, I've never read it.
I'm going to screw this name up, but Erich Maria Remarque. Remarque. That book, I think people should read simply because it's a story of German soldiers during World War I from the German side.
Oh man.
And what you find, and it's been a long time since I've read it. I want to reread it before I watch the movie, but it really like humanizes the enemy, so to speak. And so like you see that these are also young men, children really, who are also suffering the horrors of war, just like we did. Many of whom don't want to even be there. They can't, they talk about it in the book, how they can't wait for the war to be over so they can go back to being farmers or, whatever their occupation is. But it really like in this, state of like us versus them, this kind of dualistic, demonizing of the enemy and all that. Like we really, it really makes you take a step back and say, okay, is it the political powers who are playing a chess match here? Really, and it's the people who are suffering the most. And we would really probably share a beer with one of their citizens because none of us want this,
So
but it's
true,
an
man.
absolutely powerful book. So
which is, by the way, the whole point of the book, The Outsiders.
Yeah.
These two groups that hate each other are exactly alike.
Yep.
I got to run here in a second. I apologize to you and the listeners, but let me just rattle off a few more.
Yes.
One of the best nonfiction books I've read in the last few years. Well, I'll give you three really good ones. One's super popular. If you haven't read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Kids around, sorry.
Right.
It really is fantastic. It's not just a kitschy, pop culture self-help book. Mark Manson does a really good job distilling a lot of philosophical schools into really digestible, accessible nuggets of very concise wisdom. Thinking Fast and Slow by Dan Kahneman. Even if you don't read the whole thing, if you get the big bits out of what it means to have implicit bias and System 1 and System 2 thinking, phenomenal. In that same vein, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt.
Yes.
The Righteous Mind, one of the best books I've ever read, literally to the point that I see and have seen humanity differently ever since I read that book, and it's so incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And if you need one novel to read, East of Eden, always. But one that I just read that I really liked by Anthony Doerr, it's Cloud Cuckoo Land.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It is it's a book for people that love to read because it's a book about how books have held us together over millennia. So with that, I have to sign off and go have dinner with the family, which I'm excited to do.
Hey, send my love. Thanks for doing this, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I love you and love all of our listeners.
Too,
thanks for sticking with us, and great job on the podcast, John.
Thanks, buddy.
'Cause I am helpless. This water I am treading is now my own. I'm afraid my time has come. I wish for one more time to see the sun. Better days, a distant scene. And now I am not sure what I believe. Do you believe in hope? 'Cause I am hopeless. Do you believe in love? 'Cause I'm alone. Do you believe in help? 'Cause I am helpless. And this water I am treading is now my home. I have found what matters most as the lights go out and I swim towards the coast. Love of life, spirit unbound. It is the truest form of love that I have found. Do you believe in hope? 'Cause I am hopeless. Do you believe in love? 'Cause I'm alone. Do you believe in help? 'Cause I am helpless. And this water I am treading is now my home. So never take what you have for granted. 'Cause the sea of time is an unforgiving hell. Oh, and live your life full of love for those around you. I'm hoping that's the story my life will tell. I'm hoping that's the story my life will tell.